Okay, so it's just about 5 or 6 minutes past 3, so I propose that we start shortly. Just give everyone 1 or 2 more minutes, but all right. So welcome to all who are here with us for this afternoon session, which I'm sure is going to be a very, very interesting and absorbing session. And of course, particularly warm welcome to all of you from across the region and elsewhere who are joining us this afternoon. We're very, very delighted and indeed privileged to have you here with us today. My name is Anthony Gafour, and I have the privilege to be both the Vice Chair and Secretary to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Caribbean Branch, as well as the chapter chair of our local chapter, which is the actual host for today's session. Today's session, in fact, we're delighted to, be graced by the presence of Mr. John Bassie, who is the Global Vice Chair of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. And of course, it's a particular pleasure for me, having worked with John over the years, and particularly because, of course, he's one of our own from the region, who is now ascending to the highest levels, globally. And so we are indeed delighted and quite privileged to have him with us. My task is principally just to introduce the topic, which is essentially to do with the ancestral model law and its impact on the region. And I'm sure you'll be hearing quite a lot more about that from Mr. Bassie. But it is indeed interesting to note the extent to which we're seeing, of course, the development and implementation of the model law in several jurisdictions, particularly in Jamaica, the British Virgin Islands, and of course, Barbados, and of course, other jurisdictions that are, I think, due to come on board quite soon. There is a draft piece of legislation concerning the implementation of the model law in Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed there's been quite a lot of interest in terms of also doing the same thing in Guyana. So we hope that as time goes on, we're going to see more and more jurisdictions implementing this, because it gives us not only some level of consonance with what takes place globally, but also is critical for the further development and commercialization of the services that are offered in the field of arbitration. Just a very quick couple of housekeeping rules that we will ask all participants, apart from those who are speaking, to keep your microphones muted during the course of the presentation. And if it is that you wish to raise any particular questions, of course, you're free to do so in the chat. And of course, depending on time, we will also try to afford some level of flexibility to put your questions directly to Mr. Bassie. I also want to say that this, of course, is the second webinar put on by the Trinidad and Tobago chapter, and of course we hope to have another one planned, but there's also going to be some further developments from the ancestral point of view later on this year, and so on. So we'll keep you posted about that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our Education and Training Officer, Mr. CIARBTT, who will then introduce our feature speaker, presenter today, Mr. John Bassie. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Judge Gafour. Good afternoon all, and welcome to this, our second webinar. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. John Bassie, Certified Mediator, Chartered Arbitrator, and Certified Tutor at CIARB. Mr. Bassie is a 2021 Global Vice President of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and will ascend to the Office of Deputy President in 2022. He's expected to assume the role of Global Presidency in 2023. He is called to the Bar of England and Jamaica and is currently the Vice President of the Jamaican Bar Association and the Chairman of the ADR Committee. John is the founder of the Caribbean branch of CIARB, which was founded in 2009 and served as its first chairman there. He is chairman of the Board of the Dispute Resolution Foundation, which is the oldest ADR foundation in the Caribbean, and he's also a certified tutor, certified mediator, and a chartered arbitrator, of both the Supreme Court of Jamaica and the Supreme Court of the State of Florida. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as we welcome Mr. Bassie to share with us this evening in what I promise to be a very engaging session. Please enjoy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Really and truly, I'd like to first thank Branch Chair, Mr. Miles Weeks, recognize Branch Vice Chair and Chapter Chair, Justice Anthony Gafford, and of course the Co-Chair, Mr. Andrew Pullinger, Chapter Vice Chair, Ms. Ria Manki Sukram, Chapter Secretary, Mr. Hamar Kud, Chapter Treasurer, Mr. Edward Albada, Chapter Education and Training Officer, and I would assume head cook and bottle washer for the amount of time we spent with each other, Ms. CIARBTT. Thank you very much. It is certainly my honor and pleasure to share a few thoughts with you on this topic, the impact of the UNCITRAL model law on the Caribbean, a review of the model law on arbitration in our region. I've thought to approach the topic from several perspectives, and these are historical, UNCITRAL, what it is and its aims, the impact on the Caribbean, and of course the future of international commercial arbitration in our region. Am I allowed, have I been given sharing rights? Yes?
Do that. Yes, let me just see if we can organize that.
Yes, I believe you are able to share.
Let's see.
Okay.
Yes, you should be able to do that now.
Okay. So one participant can share at a time, so I believe, am I? Okay. Here we go. Okay. As you can see, our topic today is UNCITRAL model law, a review of the model law on arbitration in our region. Just to recap, like I said, I'm going to be approaching it from a historical perspective, UNCITRAL about what exactly is UNCITRAL and the impact on our region and the future of international commercial arbitration in our region. It is safe to say that in the past 20 to 25 years, for the most part, international arbitration took place in the metropolitan hubs of America, Western Europe. However, the importance of international commercial arbitration, the dispute settlement mechanism, is now quickly becoming recognized in all over the world and in quarters where it had been previously disregarded. It would seem that we're really witnessing a geographic democratization of arbitration seats, and this is particularly true of the Caribbean. Now, there has been an impact from the acceleration of globalization. I guess we can attribute that to a number of things: use of the internet, faster communication, just to name a couple of items. Nevertheless, the emerging of globalization and growth of international business has triggered an increase in international transactions and disputes which occur even where a transaction or a contract is planned. Subsequently, parties must consider including dispute resolution mechanisms in a commercial contract. Now, if we take a step back for a moment, we will see that international arbitration was historically a simple, self-regulated system. What do I mean by that? That is to say, two or more traders in dispute over their commercial relationships would turn to another person to act in resolving their issues. Now, it was clear as time progressed that international commerce, by its mere definition, cannot stay within national boundaries, and international commercial arbitration is a mechanism that crosses borders. Therefore, there was a need for an international regulations that could connect national laws and offer a uniform solution. Further, there is naturally an inadequacy of national laws that could cope with the enforcement of arbitration and arbitral awards. The Protocol of 1923 formed the first protocol on arbitration clauses. That is, it was the original basis for international enforcement of arbitration agreements and of course, this was later extended, as you may know, in 1927. We should also note that the United Nations Convention on Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign National Arbitral Awards, the New York Convention of 1958, was formed to strengthen these provisions. These protocols were heavily influenced by arbitral institutions such as the London Court of International Arbitration, which was founded in 1892. Let's talk a bit about the New York Convention. The New York Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Arbitral Awards New York was ratified in New York, 10th of June 1958, was ratified by 142 of the 192 United Nations member states. Now, the convention obliged them to recognize and enforce international commercial arbitration agreements and arbitral awards. The UNCITRAL model law adopted by the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law in 1985 is the other important contribution made by the United Nations to international arbitration. And this provided a simple and clear form for the arbitral process from the beginning to the end. We know that an international commercial contract consists of parties who are most often from different countries and who make arbitration preferable as a dispute resolution method, rather than submitting the dispute to another party's national court. These parties may appoint an arbitrator from another country or request an international institution to make an appointment, thereby acquiring neutrality in the choice of law, the venue, the procedure, and the tribunal. So let's talk a little bit about what is UNCITRAL and its aims. I think it would be beneficial if we looked at the present act. The present act is based on model law drafted by the United Nations Commission, both on domestic arbitration as well as international commercial arbitration, to provide uniformity and certainty to both categories of cases. Therefore, it can be said that the desire to protect the arbitral process from arbitration makes it necessary for jurisdictions hosting arbitrations to have effective legislation that will guide the conduct of arbitrations. UNCITRAL created a model law in 1985 that countries can use as a roadmap in establishing their own domestic legislation. So what does this model law do? Well, it does a number of things. For starters, it fills in the gap for international arbitration, and it assists states in reforming and modernizing their laws on the arbitral process. And we'll see later on how useful this is, especially in our region. In addition, it covers all stages of the arbitral process. That is, it covers arbitration agreement, the composition and jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal, the extent of court intervention, and the recognition and enforcement of the arbitral award. Recently, a new chapter 4A, which was added, which establishes a more comprehensive legal regime dealing with interim measures in support of arbitration, and the standard version of the UNCITRAL model law is now the amended version. So what are some of the aims? The model law was the foundational instrument for international arbitration, and the principal aim is that foreign and domestic arbitral awards are recognized. That is, that it requires member states' domestic courts to give full effect to arbitration agreement. Further, it assists states in reforming and modernizing laws on arbitral procedure. As I previously mentioned, it covers all the stages of the arbitral process. Now, what does that really mean for us? It means that it is a direct roadmap that looks at the arbitration agreement, the composition of the arbitral tribunal, the extent on which courts, local courts, can intervene, and of course, which I think is very important, the enforcement of the arbitral award. The unscriptural model law is designed to assist states in reforming and modernizing their laws on arbitral procedures so as to consider the particular features and needs of international commercial arbitration within a particular jurisdiction. The model law reflects a worldwide consensus on key aspects of international arbitration practice, having been accepted by states of all regions and the different legal or economic systems of the world. Just for the purists amongst us, we should note that there are amendments to articles, Article 1, subsection 2, 7, 35, subsection 2, and of course, as I mentioned, a new chapter 4A to replace Article 17. And a new Article 2A was adopted by UNCITRAL on the 7th of July, 2006. Now, the revised version of Article 7 is intended to modernize the form requirement of an arbitration agreement to better conform to international contract practices. And the newly introduced Chapter 4A establishes a more comprehensive legal regime dealing with interim measures in support of arbitration. Also, as of 2006, the standard version of the UNCITRAL model law is, as I said before, considered the amended version. So why was the model law needed? It does help for us to better appreciate the impact that the model law has had, is having, and will have in our region. We should understand why this model law was needed. As globalization moves from strength to strength, the recognition of international commercial arbitration as a dispute mechanism is increasing, and existing legislation is proven inadequate and not contemplating the use of electronic commerce. In addition, inadequate legislation at the national level creating obstacles to international trade and hence issues in maintaining cross-border legal frameworks. The model law is the key to developing that framework for cross-border international trade and increased harmonization and modernization of the law of international trade. So we now have a clear understanding of how UNCITRAL can achieve this in our Caribbean region. It accomplishes this by preparing and promoting the use and adoption of legislation, and it further engineers this by geographic democratization of arbitration seats in our region. Before I go on, there's a number of things I just said, which I want to just step back a bit and refer to. We talked about digitalization, electronic transfers, and what have you. As far back as 2012, 2013, there has been online dispute work done with respect to arbitration at the UN level. So already, as far back as then, they were moving light years ahead, anticipating the surge in electronic communication. Now, the Caribbean states that have ratified the New York Convention are here before us. A number of states, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, you can read them, Jamaica, BVI, Bahamas, Bermuda, DR, Suriname, St. Vincent, Belize, Dominican Republic, and Guyana. That's ratification. There are a number of major arbitration centers across the globe that have forged ahead and led the way for other jurisdictions to follow. For instance, in Asia, Hong Kong has established the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center in Singapore, which established the Singapore International Arbitration Center in 1991, both of which have now become key international arbitration centers, even though they had not originally positioned themselves as major venues for settling international commercial disputes. The situation in developing countries was no better. For instance, while Mauritius is now seeking to further establish itself as a sophisticated international arbitration jurisdiction with the establishment of the Mauritius International Arbitration Center, which was associated with LCIA, it's important to note that until 1992, its arbitration law was modeled after 19th century English legislation, as did many other former English colonies in Africa at that time. In Latin America, countries influenced by the 19th century ideals of Carlos Calvo enunciated the Calvo Doctrine, which generally shied away from international arbitration. Countries there are now embracing model law. In addition, notwithstanding the establishment of international arbitration centers in Dubai and Bahrain in the past 2 decades, generally, Middle Eastern states too have historically been impervious to international arbitration. These states and territories are now hosted international arbitration hubs, not to mention OHADA and OHADA, which are recently entered even the Caribbean region. We should note that the jurisdictions in the Caribbean have increasingly come to appreciate the importance of ratifying this treaty. They realize that the New York Convention enhances their ability to attract foreign investment. As I said previously, of the 156 parties to the New York Convention, 16 are from the Caribbean region. It's also interesting to note, and this is very interesting, that between 1958 and 2000, my math's right, what's that, 42 years? There were only 10 ratifications from countries in the Caribbean, and yet between 2000 and 2014, there have now been 6 ratifications. This does suggest an increased awareness of its importance. As we know, as members of Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, other jurisdictions are encouraged to ratify this convention. We should also accept that the majority of jurisdictions in the Caribbean have not adopted the model law. Let's take a look at some of the advantages of the model law. Well, it does enhance the territorial landscape and possibly lead to increased popularity of international commercial arbitration. Arbitrators can be appointed from which country as necessary. It can be seen also that the playing field will be leveled with respect to neutrality in choice of law, venue, procedure, and tribunal, especially if it is perceived that national courts may be biased and or may lack expertise, competence, resources. In addition, the model law provides for an enforceable decision and a certain flexibility of the arbitral process. Another perceived advantage is the ability to keep matters confidential. National courts may not be able to provide a satisfactory resolution for many international commercial disputes, while arbitration offers a theoretically competent decision maker who is in principle unattached to either party or any national authority. But it's only fair and balanced that we mention some possible disadvantages of the model law. Some of the disadvantages speak to cost and delay. Sometimes the cost can be quite prohibitive, and this may be hampered by or caused by delay. Many times, arbitrations are taken on, and with the best intentions, they're delayed, and the costs skyrocket. There's also the possibility, and let's face it, of biased arbitrators. Another problem may arise from the difficulties of the enforcement process in countries that are not members of the New York Convention. With respect to procedure, there are opportunities for creating procedural rules in favor of one party, and also limited discovery rights in terms of public interest to provide confidentiality. Further, even though arbitration apparently provides a neutral process in terms of the choice of law, and there are still concerns about complete neutrality, it's also important to note that neither New York Convention nor the UNCITRAL model law contains a provision concerning matters such as fraud, arbitrator bias, or misconduct. It's also suggested that similar to national courts, private arbitrators might also have financial, personal, or professional relations with one of the parties, and they might also be biased, maybe even greater than national courts, and as such, the arbitral awards may also be questionable. Now, whilst these issues are quite highly unlikely, it's very important that we do mention them so we are aware of what can possibly take place. Let's talk a little bit about the rise of arbitration in the Caribbean. At the turn of the century, many countries had not ratified the 1958 New York Convention. Neither did they have modern arbitration legislation for which the United Nations Commissions on International Trade Law, UNCITRAL, had been created in 1985 to serve as a guide. Now remember, the Caribbean region was one such group of countries. The importance of international commercial arbitration as a dispute settlement mechanism is quickly becoming recognized in quarters where this has been previously regarded. And that is particularly true in the Caribbean. Now, whilst it is becoming more apparent, more of a useful tool here, let's make no mistake. We were practicing arbitration for a while before, but it was not as apparent as we are now seeing it. Our region also is a very attractive location to host arbitrations due to its neutral geography. It's at the crossroads of the Americas, and the mixture of its legal regimes covering both common and civil law. This adds all the spice and flavor for a good arbitration set of hubs. Moreover, with the ramping up of domestic legislation to facilitate the creation of international business companies, the region has become home to quite a number of offshore corporate entities. This has made jurisdictions such as the British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, and Bermuda very attractive offshore financial centers, with the need to bolster their offering for dispute resolution. As you can imagine, with these jurisdictions inviting this sort of commercial activity, there's a need to bolster the offering of the dispute resolution mechanisms. With the intensification of commerce, Caribbean countries have come to appreciate the need for a geographically neutral dispute settlement mechanism, such as arbitration. As we stated before, 20 years ago, few jurisdictions could accommodate international arbitration. International arbitration could only take place in the hubs of America, Europe, and transboundary transactions. And transboundary transactions made it a necessary mechanism. Organizations such as the AAA, American Arbitration Association, established in the 1920s, International Center of Dispute Resolution, established in 1996, and the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris, and the London Court of International Arbitration led the way. As such, recognition of international commercial arbitration as a dispute mechanism is increasing in the Caribbean, and geographic democratization of arbitration suits in the Caribbean are also being noticed. The region is physically an attractive location. And of course, like I said, we host arbitrations, people come, people enjoy our food, our people, and do work at the same time. We are ideally placed. When we mention arbitration infrastructure in the Caribbean region, this relates to the extent to which Caribbean countries have established the necessary infrastructure to capitalize on the demand for international arbitration in this region. Of importance is the extent to which they mirror international best practices as reflected in the UNCITRAL model law on international commercial arbitration. Also, the extent to which Caribbean jurisdictions have ratified the Convention of 1958, under which successful parties can enforce awards in these treaties. 150 plus contracting states must also be examined. This includes the following jurisdictions: Bahamas, Barbados, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. There's been a limited but phenomenal impact on the Caribbean region, generally speaking. And this is evidenced by the arbitration seats that are being brought in down here, the intensification of international arbitration in the Caribbean, which has been facilitated in no small measure by the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, in particular, our Caribbean branch. Our Caribbean branch has worked assiduously to promote, train, and advance UNCITRAL and arbitration, international commercial arbitration in our region. There are some good and best practices Caribbean arbitration jurisdictions, such as the BVI International Arbitration Center, which upholds the Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Arbitral Awards and attracts business opportunities to their borders. At the turn of the century, many countries had not ratified the convention, as I said. Neither did they have modern arbitration legislation, for which UNCITRAL had been created in 1985 to serve as the guide. Now, as a result, we in the region, from this perspective, was less likely to attract foreign investment. However, like I said, we're increasing in numbers. We're up to 16. Let's take a look at some of our countries. Bahamas. Early in 2013, the Bahamas government formed the Arbitration Council. Now, this was designed to provide an action plan for establishing the Bahamas as a major arbitration hub. The infrastructure of arbitration legislation, facilities, and skilled personnel has attracted major cases to the Bahamas. The strategic location of the islands just off the US mainland has made it an ideal location for US parties seeking a neutral venue to resolve their disputes. For the Bahamas, the impetus to sign the New York Convention came originally from the maritime sector, as arbitration is a preferred method of resolving maritime disputes, and as the Bahamas is the 7th largest ship registry in the world as per Lloyd's. Ratifying the New York Convention was imperative to allow awards to be automatically enforced in signatory states. The Council, consisting of members from the government,